The Lantern of Blackwood. The village of Blackwood lay cradled between dense forests and rolling hills, a place where fog lingered long after sunrise and the wind carried whispers through the narrow streets. It was a small, tightly knit community where everyone knew each other's business, or at least thought they did. Yet, something had begun to stir in the woods that bordered the village, something old and restless, and the villagers could not name it. Edmund, the local woodsman, had spent his life among the trees, cutting timber and guiding travelers through paths few dared to tread. One evening, while inspecting a fallen oak near the forest's edge, he noticed a faint glow hovering between the trunks. At first, he thought a firefly or a reflection of moonlight, but as he approached, the light solidified into the shape of a lantern, old, wrought iron, and flickering with a flame that burned without smoke. Curiosity overrode caution. Edmund reached out, and the lantern's warmth spread to his hands, though he felt no burn. That night, when he returned home, the lantern remained with him, though he had not carried it. In the darkness of his cottage, it glimmered softly, casting elongated shadows across the walls, shadows that seemed to move on their own. The next evening, the villagers spoke in hushed tones of shapes glimpsed near the edge of the forest. A boy claimed to have seen his father's face inside the light, pale and staring, though his father had been at the tavern all night. Others whispered of familiar voices calling them into the woods, never to return. Edmund tried to dismiss it as imagination, yet when he lit a candle, the lantern glowed brighter, and in its illumination, he saw fleeting forms, the silhouettes of neighbors who had vanished years ago, frozen in silent despair. A chill ran down his spine. He felt the forest watching him, listening, as though the trees themselves waited for his next step. And then, from somewhere deep within the glow, a voice whispered, soft, almost tender, "Edmund." He froze, the hair on his arms standing rigid. The voice was unmistakable, intimate, someone he knew, someone long gone. He took a step back, but the lantern floated toward him, swaying like a pendulum, and the shadows lengthened, stretching across the walls as if reaching for him. And Edmund realized the light was not meant to guide. It was meant to claim. That night, Edmund could not sleep. The lantern sat on his table, glowing faintly, casting shadows that danced like living things on the walls. He dared not touch it again, yet the pull in his chest insisted he keep his eyes on it. Every flicker seemed to echo the voice he had heard, whispering his name with unbearable intimacy. He rose at midnight, drawn by some instinct he could not name, and found himself standing at the edge of the forest. Fog curled around the trees, thick and suffocating. The lantern floated before him, hovering a few inches from the ground, illuminating the gnarled roots and the twisted branches. As he stepped forward, he thought he saw movement between the trunks, pale, familiar faces glancing at him through the mist, neighbors, friends, even strangers long forgotten. Their eyes were hollow, mouths opening as if to speak, but no sound came. And yet Edmund felt their thoughts, a silent chorus of longing and despair pressing against his mind. The further he walked, the more the forest seemed to respond. Trees bent subtly, branches brushing against his shoulders, steering him deeper along paths he did not remember. The lantern led him, yet it was no gentle guidance. It demanded. Every shadow seemed to whisper promises and threats intertwined. By the time he reached a small clearing, the lantern floated above a fallen stone well, light spilling into the darkness below. Edmund peered over the edge, expecting water, Instead, a deeper void stared back, black, infinite, and impossibly cold. From the darkness, the faces appeared again, closer now, pressing against the edges of the well, mouths opening in silent cries. "Edmund!" The voice called once more, softer this time, pleading. And yet there was an undertone, a menace that coiled like a serpent. "Come closer." He stumbled back, heart hammering, but the lantern tilted toward him, almost impatiently, as if urging him forward. A sudden realization struck him. The villagers who had disappeared over the years, perhaps they had followed the light too, seduced into the forest, into this eternal darkness. The wind whispered through the clearing, carrying their voices, their warnings. Edmund's hands shook as he held the lantern in front of him, its flame cold against his skin. Something moved below in the well, a shadow, taller than a man, stretching upward, reaching for him. Before he could think, the shadow surged, and a hand, skeletal and pale, clawed toward the lantern, almost brushing his fingers. Edmund fell back, tripping over roots and leaves. He scrambled to his feet, the lantern bouncing before him, illuminating the eyes in the forest that watched, waiting. A new voice joined the first, layered atop it, a chorus of whispers, each name familiar to him. Edmund, Edmund, and he understood with a shiver that there was no turning back. The light had found him, and it would not let him go. Edmund ran blindly through the forest, the lantern floating before him like a willful creature. Every branch that scraped his face seemed to whisper warnings. Every rustle in the underbrush carried voices from the past. He tripped over roots, fell into shallow hollows, and yet the lantern never faltered, its light unwavering, leading him deeper into the woods. The shadows between the trees began to shift, forming shapes almost human. Neighbors long gone, friends who had vanished, each face pale and twisted in sorrow. They reached toward him with silent hands, urging him closer, beckoning with a hypnotic sway. And still the voice came, "Edmund, join us. It's easier this way." He stumbled into a clearing he did not recognize. At its center stood a small stone chapel, crumbling, roof sagging, overgrown with ivy. The lantern hovered at the doorway, as if insisting he enter. Edmund hesitated, feeling the cold pressure in his chest. Something within the chapel seemed alive, breathing, waiting. Summoning courage, he stepped inside. The air was heavy and musty, thick with the scent of rot and smoke. Shadows clung to the corners like living things, moving slightly whenever his eyes drifted. On the altar lay a single book, its pages yellowed, edges frayed. Edmund felt compelled to open it. The text was indecipherable, yet the letters seemed to shimmer, forming shapes that made his head spin. From the darkness behind him came a shuffle, a quiet movement. He turned. There, a figure crouched in the shadows, half hidden beneath the chapel's broken beams. Its eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the lantern's light. He recognized the face. Old Thomas, a man from the village who had disappeared decades ago. But Thomas's expression was hollow, his lips moving without sound, mouthing words that filled Edmund's mind. "Do not resist, it is too late." The lantern floated closer, its flame flickering, casting long fingers of light across the walls. Edmund's heart pounded as he realized the forest itself had conspired to bring him here. The whispers layered upon each other, a crescendo of names, promises, and threats, until it felt as though the air vibrated with their collective will. And then a new presence emerged, a tall shadow beyond the altar, coalescing from the darkness, its shape like the lantern itself, flame-like but malevolent. The whispers ceased for a moment, replaced by a low hum that pressed against Edmund's mind. The lantern drifted to the center of the chapel, hovering above the shadow, illuminating it fully. Its light revealed a figure cloaked in black, face hidden, hand extended toward Edmund. The voice returned, singular now, cold and commanding. "Step closer, Edmund. Embrace the light, and all your fears will be gone." Edmund froze, torn between flight and the irresistible pull of the lantern. The shadows stirred, edges of the chapel twisting as if alive, the whispers returning, louder, desperate. He knew one wrong move could bind him here forever. And yet, Edmund's legs refused to move. The lantern floated before him, swaying, its flame pulsing as if alive. The shadows in the chapel stretched unnaturally, their edges rippling and writhing across the broken walls. The figure beyond the altar raised its hand, and the air seemed to thicken, pressing against his chest, making each breath a struggle. "Come closer, Edmund. Feel the warmth of the light." The voice echoed inside his skull, intimate and horrifying at once. Every face he had ever known, living or dead, appeared in the lantern's glow, eyes hollow, mouths moving in silent entreaty. They called him, tugged at him, whispering promises of release, of peace, of escape from fear. Edmund's hand shook violently. He wanted to run, yet the floor beneath him seemed to dissolve in a shadow, leaving only the lantern and the figure at the altar. The whispers layered, overlapping, until they became a deafening chorus in his mind. His own name repeated endlessly, as though the forest, the shadows, and the lantern itself had united to bind him. The figure extended both hands. Flames of dark light flickered across the chapel walls, and a lantern floated to meet them, hovering between Edmund and the shadow. The glow intensified, bathing the room in an unnatural radiance. The air vibrated, and Edmund felt his body tugged toward the light, toward the figure, as if invisible strings had tied him there. He closed his eyes, heart hammering. A single thought echoed louder than all the whispers. "Do not answer." He pressed the lantern with trembling hands, trying to grasp it, but it hovered just beyond reach. The shadow's presence pressed closer, tendrils of darkness curling around the altar, reaching for his ankles, wrapping around his knees. With a surge of desperation, Edmund threw himself to the floor, rolling to the side, and the lantern wobbled violently but did not extinguish. The shadow shrieked, a soundless cry that seemed to shake the air itself. Dust fell from the chapel beams, and cracks appeared in the walls. For the first time, the figure hesitated. Seizing the moment, Edmund scrambled backward, dragging himself toward the door. The whispers surged one final time, overlapping voices calling his name, pleading, threatening, beckoning. He clutched the lantern, almost tearing it from its hovering place. A final, bone-chilling whisper reached him. "It is yours now, if you take it." With a burst of will, Edmund flung the lantern through the doorway. It hit the forest floor outside and extinguished with a hiss, and in that instant, the shadows shrieked and recoiled, retreating into the corners of the chapel. The figure dissolved into darkness, leaving only the empty, echoing building behind. Edmund collapsed to the ground, gasping, the night air of Blackwood filling his lungs. The forest was silent, unnervingly calm. Yet, even as relief washed over him, he felt the weight of unseen eyes watching from the tree-line. Somewhere, deep within the darkness, a faint glow pulsed, almost imperceptible. Edmund lay in the clearing, chest heaving, every breath a ragged gasp. The ruins of the chapel behind him were silent now, its stones scorched, broken, and blackened where the lantern's unholy light had seared them. For a fleeting moment, he allowed himself to believe it was over. The shadows had vanished, the whispers receded, and the forest seemed still. But the forest silence was not peace. Somewhere deep among the gnarled trees, a faint glow flickered, soft at first, then stronger, pulsing with a rhythm like a heartbeat. Edmund's stomach knotted. The lantern had returned, not extinguished, merely waiting, patient and deliberate, as if it had chosen him personally. He felt the eyes of the forest on his back, unseen but undeniable, and knew that curiosity and caution alike were worthless here. He staggered back toward the village, the mist clinging to his cloak like a living thing. The villagers glanced at him warily as he passed, noting the wild look in his eyes, the tremor in his hands. None spoke of the forest. None mentioned the disappeared neighbors. Blackwood had long learned that silence was safer than truth. Even if one survived the lantern, one carried the memory like a scar on the soul. That night, Edmund sat in his cottage, trying to sleep, yet sleep would not come. The lantern hovered in the corner, faint but unmistakable, its flame flickering without smoke. The shadows it cast seemed no longer limited to the walls. They slithered across the floor, forming shapes, faces, and hands that were not quite human. Edmund felt the pull of the light again, subtle but irresistible, tugging at his chest, whispering in voices both familiar and alien. "Come closer. We are waiting. It is so much easier." Edmund pressed his hands over his eyes, shaking, trying to deny its presence, trying to convince himself it was gone. But the forest had learned patience over centuries, and a lantern was patient still. Every corner of the room seemed alive, every shadow a finger pointing, guiding, claiming. He understood with grim clarity. The lantern could not be destroyed. It did not die. It only waited for the curious, the wandering, the brave or foolish. By dawn, the glow had vanished, leaving only the dim light of morning through the window. Edmund rose, stiff and pale, knowing the memory would never leave him. He had survived, yes, but the lantern's curse would endure, not just in Blackwood, but in every mind it touched, waiting for the next soul to follow its light. Somewhere in the forest, the glow pulsed again, slow, steady, eternal, like the heartbeat of something old, patient, and endlessly hungry. Edmund stepped outside, feeling the mist curl around him. The village lay quiet, but he knew better. The lantern was out there, waiting for another night, another wanderer. And he had seen its true face, and it would haunt him forever.